So welcome. So Matt Myers, marriage and family therapist at Traverse Counseling and Consulting, and my esteemed colleague, Callie Alba. Um, I think just to share a little bit about me and why we chose this. So Matt Myers, marriage and family therapist. I've got my wife is an educator, our children are, um, uh, um, I think, pretty upset about the fact that their life handed them a therapist and an educator as parents, and so they're navigating that difficulty on top of trying to figure out COVID and distance learning too. Um, well, then I gotta admit, Deb. Callie and I put this together because we're seeing this be a challenge for a lot of two household families, during COVID. How do you navigate that two household with the unique challenge of having uh, young people that are starting to launch? So welcome, Deb and Jennifer. Um, Jennifer, if you want to put your uh, um, mute on, and then Deb, if there's any introduction that you want to do, feel free to jump in right here, and then Callie will do a little intro.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to welcome everyone, and thank you for participating in our Parenting with Vision series, and I hope they find it helpful.
Yeah, so thanks Deb for the invitation. We were excited to partner with Wayzata Schools and Community Ed again. This is an area and an interest in us in just helping support parents and families, even parents of adult children who need some still need some guidance, but certainly in a situation where COVID is kind of at the forefront of our minds and reshaping how we do things. Um, it's an important thing for us too. So I'll let Callie introduce herself. Go ahead, Callie.
Callie Alba, I'm a marriage and family therapist over at Traverse as well. I do a lot of work with kids and adolescents, parents, and family systems as a whole. And just really grateful to be here. I think 2020 and COVID has just been such a challenging and difficult year for families and for parents, and especially for parents and families in two household systems. And so just really felt like this was a series and a topic that was really important to be able to start having conversations and to be able to connect with you guys about. So.
Good. Logistically, Deb, you don't have access to let people in, I don't think, but I'm going to try and make you a host. And if there are people jumping in, you can let people in too. Okay, Deb?
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. You got that access? Correct, Deb?
I saw that it.
Okay. Okay. So welcome.
Yes, it's working.
Great.
Yeah, thanks.
Great.
And if you have questions during the presentation too, Carolyn Burrows is attending as well. She's our office manager here, and she can take questions just through that chat function. And if we have time at the end, we'll be able to get through those too. So some outcomes for us today. So Matt and I created this presentation, and these are some of the things that we'd want you guys to be able to walk away with today. So understanding what differentiation is and the impact of COVID-19 on the adult child. Finding alignment around managing your adult child's agency while also helping them launch. Managing differing levels between households or between the parent and adult child of the concern about the pandemic, and regulating parenting time. How do you navigate these extended stays with adult children without any kind of court documentation outlining a strategic parenting time agreement? And then also wrapping up with just understanding mental health concerns and the adult child.
Did that pop up for you, Callie? Sorry.
It did. It was a little delayed.
Oh, okay.
So things to remember about adult children. So in COVID times, if your adult child lives or stays outside of your home, they're technically not a part of your bubble, which is hard because we always want to consider that our kids are a part of our household and a part of our families. But remembering that if they don't directly live with us, they're not technically a part of that bubble. And so it's still important to be able to follow the guidelines like 6 to 10 feet, wearing masks when it's possible, and having windows open, although maybe a little ironic this holiday season being in Minnesota. So you might need to bundle up if you choose to have that option as well.
And this may not be intuitive for your young people, especially if this is their first semester away, or first time away from home. That the impression that they're not part of your household, part of your bubble, may come at a cost to their sense of belonging in the family. So how you communicate this will be really important.
Mhm.
And then another CDC recommendation is to have your windows open if you're going to be, have young people who are part of your, not part of your bubble. I don't know if we can do that in this climate, but anyway, silly recommendation.
So the job of the adult child is differentiation. And what is differentiation? You know, technically, it's the ability to separate oneself, your thoughts and feelings from others. It's the job of the adult child. So thinking about late teens to early 20s to be able to differentiate from their parents. And kids need to differentiate from their parents to grow into interdependent adults. And so when we talk about interdependence, it's talking about a relationship that can be mutually reliant on one another, that you can recognize and value the importance of that emotional bond together while also maintaining a solid sense of self within that relationship. So it's being able to have that kind of interdependence together, and for our kids to be able to have that solid sense of self separate from their parents as well. And you might see that your kids present differently in their levels of differentiation between the two households.
Mhm.
So it's really important for co-parents to have conversations about how their adult kids are showing up in the house because they might be presenting differently. And so if co-parents can talk about how each kid is presenting, they can come together and be able to align on how best to support their adult child. Some challenges to differentiation under COVID. Adult children are now limited in testing the limits and boundaries of their interdependence and making choices. Partially just because of their safety, we have to quarantine, stay distant. Our schooling is different. How we do relationships and friendships are all different. Job prospects are different. And so our adult children are having to kind of learn how to differentiate in a really different and new world. So how they manage curfews or having jobs, balancing responsibilities, doing distance learning, regulating just safety.
This is Herman,
There's
the 2-year-old.
different ways of figuring out and learning about their own individual sense
Beginning
of
of
self.
these sort of teenage years.
So a delay in launching. We might start to see their kids delay in when or how they launch, and they might have some struggles in being able to do so. Our kids might rely on their parents for more things and for a longer period of time because of this delay in their launching period. So the worry here would be that our kids will fully enter into adulthood at a later stage in life, delaying other things, other life events as an adult as a result. So thinking about starting their careers, pursuing secondary education, marriage, home buying, some of those kind of adult life events might get pushed further because of the delay in the launching too.
So if you recall reading to your children, your adult children, if you recall reading to them, "Oh, the places you'll go," when they were little. I remember my daughter, she's 16 now, a junior. I read this to her first grade class, Mrs. G's class, and I remember getting choked up because I knew, one day that my first grade daughter, about 7 years old at the time, would be off to big things, right? She'd be soaring to the highest highs, and sometimes um, tasting victory, and other times tasting failure and learning from it. One of the pages in the one of the parts of the story is this waiting place, where people are just waiting for a train or a bus or a plane or the phone, waiting around for an answer, waiting for their hair to grow. Some of us are waiting to get a haircut, and we're just waiting. Everyone is just waiting. And part of what I think we may be experiencing now, especially in the development of our children and even in the development of our adult children, is this kind of waiting room place where, as Callie said, there may be this delay in some of the opportunities to explore more independence and to gain a greater degree of interdependence, than without COVID. So being aware that while we may be wanting and expecting our young people to grow and flourish and launch, there may be some challenges developmentally, for them, in that just that we're in this waiting place. So if you have your microphone on, if you could turn it off just so we don't have background feedback.
Sorry about that. So how could parents help? We're talking about this job of the adult child is to differentiate, and we're talking about there might be a delay in it. So how can parents help? Well, when we're in COVID times, we can provide them with choices, allowing your adult kids to make small decisions, and then have that follow up too. Have a discussion about what went well and what didn't go well, asking them questions like, if you could, what would you do differently? What were you expecting to happen? And how is that different from what actually happened? We're helping them create that thought process and be able to have this whole well-rounded way of looking at the decisions that they're making, the consequences of that, whether that be positive or negative or neutral. We're helping them just develop that thought process together. So some examples of small challenges could be like completing an assignment by a specific date and time, and then checking in with parents about it. Having a curfew still, even if you guys are deciding to just fully quarantine, nobody's going to work, no one's going to school, still just checking in with mom or dad at a specific time at the end of the day, or even in the middle of the day. Having open discussions about how or when to mask, having just open dialogue about your kids' point of views of it. What's your point of view? What's the family's point of view? How do we do safety? Or instructing your kids to make their own doctor appointment. And if they're over 18, perhaps they even go by themselves too. I think that I have quite a few clients that would be quite a challenge for them to be able to call their own doctor and make that appointment too. And then making sure that both parents are aligned in implementing the choices and challenges. We want to make sure that for our kids, they're seeing that consistency between the two households, and that parents are aligned in how to implement it and how to do that follow-up too.
When thinking about the things that are most important, Callie and I think these 7 dimensions are really important to get clear on as parents. What and how are you prioritizing these 7 dimensions? Now, one of the challenges may occur if households are prioritizing differently. That's where we're going to start running into some difficulty in getting aligned around choices and challenges. But these 7 dimensions we think are really important. So how are you prioritizing your relationship with your adult kiddo? So if that is first and foremost, there may be some things that you may choose to let go of, in terms of challenges. Skills of becoming an adult and making responsible decisions may also be a priority. And so how you incentivize and consequent those decisions may be important. Safety of your household, especially if there is somebody vulnerable in your household, or you will be you're making plans to spend time with somebody, or somebody will be entering your household that is vulnerable. how are you prioritizing that adult-child's relationship with the other parent? How does that factor in? Their relationship with their peers and their mental and emotional health. We know that this is taking a toll. This period of decreasing social in the real connections is taking a toll. And so how are you prioritizing that? How does that fall within this uh, spectrum here? And then adult-child's relationship with extended family. So thinking about all those dimensions, how are you using these dimensions to help you organize some decision making around how you want to help lead your son or daughter through this period of time as they re-engage with the family and with each household. Something to be aware of. All relationships. The Murray Bowen, one of the early family therapists, said the most stable relationship is 3 people. So when there's difficulty in a relationship, that party of 2, that dyad, seeks to diffuse some of that anxiousness, that tension, that frustration with a third party. In families, in 2 households, sometimes that is, the adult child may be a part of that. And so that can be unhealthy when we're passing along our resentment towards the other parent on the child. So that first bullet point, if we're resentful of an adult child's decision, it may be more about the difference between myself and the other household and less about their decision. It's still about their decision, but the fact that we as parents are not aligned gives latitude to the child to make that decision. And it may impair, if we have resentment, it may get in the way of us communicating with the other parent, which then in turn, we often then use the child to do the communication between the 2 households, which puts the child in a difficult place, the adult child in a difficult place. And then anytime we personify anyone in the system as the victim of their dad, the victim of their mom, I am the victim of the mom or the dad or the child. Now we're entering into a really unhealthy way of experiencing triangulation, or that triad of relationships. So being really aware of how am I managing my frustration about the other household and their choices. How am I managing my resentment so I can still communicate at a parent-to-parent level? And how am I making sure that I'm being cautious about how I see myself or my child as the victim or as the rescuer, of them or for me, in relation to the other parent. This puts them in a really difficult position in that they begin to take care of the adult often, or one of the adults, or both of the adults, which can lead them to want to exit out of the system or have difficulty exiting the system if they feel as though they have some responsibility for taking care of one or both of the adults. So parenting time with an adult, we put that in quotation marks because, really what we're talking about is how do we sustain relationship for an adult child with both of his or her parents. We don't, obviously the court documents don't relate to adults anymore. They relate to minor children. So ideally, we would be aligned around what that looks like. One of the challenges, so let me just talk through this a little bit. One of the challenges for young people coming home from, whether it's they're on military leave, they're coming home from college, they took a job somewhere else, they're coming to stay with parents. Having parents not be clear about how parenting time is going to work, or how staying or celebrating with family members is going to work can be very treacherous. I think I talk about another slide here coming up, but I just want to highlight it right now. Coming home, I may feel this anxiety about going one direction or the other because I hurt I hurt mom if I spend time with dad. I hurt dad if I spend time with mom. It creates this loyalty bind. And so the more that we can do to get clear between parents, if we're on the same page, the less of that anxiousness they will feel. And then we can decide if we are aligned around what we want that to look like. We can also get aligned around how much input do we want them to have in how they spend time with. And if we are really clear about that, that frees them of that dilemma. And then being clear, scheduling family time and celebration with each side of the family. So like I said, without alignment, it leaves the adult child in this kind of place of not knowing or believing that if I go one way, I hurt the other. If I go the other, I hurt the other. So either direction I go, I cause harm to one parent or the other. And it also creates this sense of kind of this crisis of belonging. I don't know where I really belong. I don't know which direction to go. I don't know where I'm wanted. I don't know. I don't know who I'm a part of, who and how I'm a part of this. Getting clear between households can really help young people, young adults, to manage this crisis very differently. So some things that can help. Talking about this is not mom's time, dad's time. This is the adult child's time with mom or dad. So thinking about it as this is about your relationship with your mom. This is about your relationship with your dad, your other parent, your extended family on the other side. Thinking about it not as custody, or this is not about this is not about my time with you. This is about your relationship with me and with the other parent. So thinking about it in relational terms for them. Here are some other really important things to discern as you probably are already trying to figure out. How do we manage the possibility of exposures, and what do we do about quarantining if we should need to do that? So identifying longer stays. We're going to have you stay with dad or mom, for a longer period of time, helping to discuss that with them, identifying together how much input you want them in having in that. And then using all the virtual tools that we have to be able to participate in family gatherings within each household, or things to be discussing at the parent-to-parent level, and then including them in conversation.
I think another note too is keeping in mind that structure can really alleviate anxiety for our kids. And so if we can provide that structure and this foundation of this is kind of the setup that we're going to work within, and I want your input of how you want to operate within that structure, it can really help our kids just alleviate that anxiety, alleviate some anxiety for you too. If we just know what the structure is that we're going to operate within, then we know the clear path to move forward to.
So if there is communication, remember, use those priorities that we talked about to help identify where each household stands. Now, one of the things that Callie and I, when we work with families, we help identify the differences as the issue, not one parent or the other parent. So it's not he's bad or she's good, or she's bad, he's good, he's right, she's wrong. It's not that. It's here are the different priorities. This is the way, and each of them has merit based on where each parent's stands. And so with those differences, how do we move through that? That's the goal. And if you have that kind of high level communication, you can move through this much better to help your adult child move through this as well. But getting clear about where each stands in terms of this is how I'm prioritizing. I hear this is how you're prioritizing. That's where we're stuck. How can we manage this well? So proactive co-parenting. And this is, I think, Cal, you were going to jump in here, right? Or no, I was going to do this. I can't remember. I was gonna do, okay. So, so get ahead of this as much as you can. These are very likely areas that will cause stress, and if you can start talking about them with your co-parent now, it will reduce the stress later, even when these things, if they should need to be activated. Um, you still will have stress around them because they're, um, for an exposure or anything like that, it's going to create stress on your system, but get ahead of this. So discussing a testing strategy, if there's a cohesive strategy between the two households, wonderful. If there's not, be clear about how each household is operating, and then support each household in doing whatever the strategy of the other household is, and then mitigate the difference in that strategy in some way. If there's a way to get on the same page about curfew. Now, the state of Minnesota has helped us out, I suppose, to some degree by limiting access to restaurants and bars and that kind of thing after 10 o'clock. However, the research indicates that people are making poorer decisions in the evenings after 9 o'clock around mitigating the exposure. So being clear between households, what comfort level do we have with exposure, curfew? How are we going to handle shelter in place? What are some scenarios, and how would we handle that? If one of us had an illness, or multiple people had an illness, how would we handle that? If there is a vulnerability of a family member, how are we managing that? If there's going to be travel, how do we want to manage that? And if a winter spring semester comes and our adult child is enrolled in school somewhere, but if they're doing distance learning, how will we operate? So proactively getting ahead of these things will help manage the anxiety and the stress when it comes, when one of these things, like at least one of these things, likely need to be discussed.
So tip number 2 talks about invitations. If conversations or having these discussions can be difficult, or if there's been a history of there being kind of conflicted ways of communicating, we invite you to utilize kind of the art of the invitation. And it's simply just inviting your co-parent to participate in a parenting conversation. It's saying, hey, I'm seeing that, it's my perspective that we're not seeing eye to eye on some of this stuff, and I'd really like to work on figuring out a solution that works best for our family. Would you be open to having a discussion with me so we can figure out the best way to move forward for our kid? Using ground rules can be really helpful. So in this conversation, we believe that every person has dignity. We're going to refrain from blaming one another or other people or other parties about the current situation. We're going to be open to listening to each other and having respect for each other's unique perception. It doesn't mean that you have to agree or like their perception, but simply just having a respect for their valid perspective. And also be able to have a timeout at any time. If you're noticing yourself or your co-parent become heightened, or you might kind of go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, to be able to take time out and say, you know what, I'm noticing that I'm feeling a little dysregulated. I need to just take 5 minutes. This conversation is really important to me, and so I want to get back to it, but I just need a couple of minutes to collect my thoughts for a second. And to not give up if your invitation is declined. What I like about the invitation is that it gives the other person an opportunity to say yes or no. And if they do say no, that doesn't mean that all is lost. You get to continue to invite, and you may just need to change that invitation, how it looks, but to still continue to invite your co-parent into the conversation if it's something that you think is going to be meaningful and add value for you guys being able to parent your adult child together.
One of the reasons that last one is so important is we know that when we lose hope that we can influence a situation, and when we lose hope that things can change and be better, we engage very differently. And so without hope, we may not be able to have much influence at all. And we often even contribute to participating in things that make it more difficult for our kids in just lacking that sense of hope. So don't give up, continue to have some hope that even though it may be hard to work with my co-parent, I may be able to have some influence and help my child manage the dissonance between the households, even a little bit, okay? Um, uh, there's a author named Kim Scott who developed a framework that she calls radical candor. And radical candor is about um, uh, a high sense of care and a high sense of challenge. So in terms of influence, what she suggests is this kind of approach has the best potential for influence with another person. So it's really leaning into care and concern for whether it's our co-parent or a child, our adult child, um, and leaning into being direct at the same time. So for instance, with our adult child who may be making some decisions to expose themselves, we may have limited influence, right? Because they are over 18, and they may have some level of independence and certainly a belief that their decisions are theirs to make. Um, so a radical candor position might be to really let them know, hey, I really care about you. I care about your grandparents too. And I want to challenge you a little bit because the behavior that I'm seeing makes me really concerned that you may put yourself at risk and your grandparents at risk. And so if you're going to do this behavior, here's what you're going to see from me. I care about you so much. I honor your decision, but I'm really uncomfortable with the direction you're going because of the risk that you're taking on. So using radical candor, whether it's with your adult son or daughter or your co-parent, um, another dimension that she identified was this ruinous empathy, which is low challenge, a high sense of care. And this is what we might consider Minnesota nice, where we're nice and we express care and concern, but we kind of dance around our challenges with each other. And she says this particular dimension does not impact change because people don't get the important feedback. She actually says the dimension that is second most influencing is that other quadrant, the obnoxious aggressive, where it's low care but high challenge. Certainly not the place that we want to encourage people to go. But do note that when we don't challenge, behavior often does not change. So so utilizing radical candor, whether it's with your adult child or your co-parent, is going to be an important tool for you.
So tip 4 talks about giving yourself and your co-parent some grace. 2020 is hard and tensions are really high. Being able to acknowledge and understand your own and your co-parents' experience of the 2020 distress. If that's just COVID related, employment related, just dealing with kids and school and all the ups and downs, the griefs and losses that we've had to experience in 2020, just understanding and acknowledging and validating that those experiences are real and everything that you're feeling is valid. And to just let yourself have some space for those feelings and those emotions to be true and valid and real. And give yourselves a little bit of grace that 2020 is a year that none of us expected, none of us prepared for. And so just giving yourselves a little bit of grace and be able to maneuver and manage all that 2020 has brought us.
Grief and loss. So this is a period of enormous grieving. you know, I've got a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And while none of them are launching, certainly our 16-year-old, there are days where we'd love it if she would launch. Um, but part of the process here of grieving is discerning what is it that I have control over. With an adult child, and with a conflicted co-parenting relationship, there may be a lot that I have to let go of, that I don't have control over. So identifying what is it that I can influence here, and what is it that I cannot influence, right? If anybody's familiar with the Serenity Prayer, God grant me the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to, or the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So what do I have control over, and what don't I have control over? And what will I hold on to? What is going to be really important for me? When I look back at those priorities, what is so important to me that even if I don't have a lot of influence over, I'm still going to hold on to? And if I have some consequences or choices I make regarding managing that priority, and I'm not aligned with the other parent, and my relationship with my adult child is difficult, what will it cost me if I hold on to that? And am I prepared for that loss? And then how will I handle that loss in a healthy way? One of the difficulties I have in managing my grieving and my family is that I can sometimes place blame on others when there's a loss that I'm experiencing.
Mhm.
You know, there are ways that I look at failures of our local government when I see my friends and family get sick, and instead of going to a compassionate place, I go to blame. And so how will you handle the loss in a healthy way that doesn't focus on placing blame, but focuses on acknowledging the loss and doing the letting go, whatever it is that you need to move on without blaming, especially blaming your other co-parent, blaming your son or daughter, your adult child. Um, so being attentive to the grieving. What is it that I can have influence, and what do I need to let go of?
So moving into just overall mental health concerns and adult children. So when we think about therapeutic support for adult kids, if they're over the age of 18, they legally have agency for their medical appointments, including therapy. But still, when we think about our late teens, early 20s kids, they still need their parent support quite often. And you guys have great perspectives of how they're doing, how they're showing up. You might be supporting them emotionally, physically, financially in ways that would be beneficial to have participation in therapy. So how and when do you intervene? What do you do as parents that are in different places with seeing concerns? Well, first, you want to be able to have alignment with parents about concerns. Earlier, we talked about being able to have conversations of just how your kids are showing up in terms of differentiation, but also in terms of just their overall mental health. How are they presenting in each household? Are there any differences of how they're showing up when they're in relationship with either one of you? And asking if individual therapy is enough for your adult child. Is there a way that there's a larger systemic concern that family therapy would be potentially more beneficial for you and for your adult child to manage and go through this journey together? And what do you do when there are relational problems between a parent and the adult child? What if the problem exists with your co-parent and your adult child? How do you want to help lead your child to be able to manage those relational problems that they're experiencing with your co-parent? Is there therapeutic support or interventions? Is there a family therapy element that would be really beneficial for your adult child to be able to manage together? You're on it, Matt. Go ahead.
So especially with your adult child in this situation, use that radical candor. So I care about you, and these are some things that I am seeing that cause me concern. I don't see you showing up even virtually to family gatherings, and that causes me concern. I see what looks to be um, um, feelings of being overwhelmed by your responsibilities with school or work right now, and I get really concerned. And I want to support you in finding some resources to help you manage this.
Mhm.
Going into some of those conversations, be predictable. Um, uh, Anticipate their response. How will they respond? And then prepare for that. Okay,
Mhm.
so they might react with some defensiveness. This is your fault. This is mom's fault. This is dad's fault. Be prepared to respond to their reactivity in a way that keeps you focused on the observations you have about ways in which they might be struggling. And if there are some concerns, maybe there's substances that you're concerned they're using, or their behavior is becoming more and more problematic. Identify what are the bottom lines. What are you at what point does the way that you're doing relationship with them shift? So if you don't get support, I can't have you stay here anymore. I really want you to stay here, but this has become so toxic for us. Okay, that might be a bottom line. Think about what are the bottom lines. You may not use the car if you continue to use substances. If you don't take a look at this, we've got to shut down access to the internet, or we're not going to pay your cell phone bill. So think about what are the bottom lines. What are you willing to create as a natural or a logical consequence, or allow them to experience a natural consequence if they are unwilling to do something different. Okay, so anxiety causes change. Part of, if you see them really struggling, how will you create some anxiety so that they will change? If possible, coordinate this with the other parent. This will have the most power if both households are aligned on this. If both households are not aligned around this, you will likely find that your son, your daughter, your adult child will move over to that other household, whichever one is more lenient. And then you need to be ready to do the grieving and to stay with radical candor. Um, if you don't at that point, you may reinforce a problematic dynamic. So be aware of that. Um, so here are some things that we think would be good things to look for in terms of, if your son, your daughter, your adult child is struggling. These are things to pay attention to. If you're unable to implement kind of household rules with them, that may be a sign of a concern. If they refuse to connect with one parent, there's likely something going on in that relationship, but also in the family system. If there's an escalation with rules or boundaries, if you take this from me, I will hurt you. I won't do my homework. I won't go to school. I won't go back to work. If there's some kind of escalation like that. Did you want to add to that, Callie?
Oh no, I was just
Okay.
throwing out threats to harm themselves too.
Yes. Yep. Threats to harm themselves too. So if you hear something like that, yep. And then holding hostage pro-social behaviors to get some desired outcomes. So I am not going to do any of my schoolwork or send any job applications if you don't give me X, Y, or Z. If you continue to have this household rule, I will not do X, Y, or Z. Something that is in my interest and my own sense of health, that I would withhold that, so that you give me what it is that I'm asking for. That's a sign of a young person, young adult who's learned some some maladaptive ways of trying to meet their needs. And then if you just see them disappear, you kind of know what that looks like if they're just disengaged. That would be a sign of a concern. So, Callie, what else did you want to add? Do you want to add to that last
Um,
slide?
no, I think, the only thing that I'd add too is just, you know your kids and you know how they're kind of interacting with the world, and in COVID and 2020 just has been such a challenging year. And so, I think what I'm seeing with my clients that, across the life age spectrum is that there is a difficulty in just being able to manage and regulate, thoughts and emotions. And our kids that are launching are planning their futures. And so for many of them, it feels as though 2020 and quarantine and COVID will never end, that we won't get back into a world that feels different. And so it's a reminder too for our kids of all ages to know that there will be an end to this. It might not be in the timeline that we want or that we like, but there will be an end, and we will get back to this our normal way of life once again too.
Remember, as a parent, you're playing the long game here too. This is not, your relationship, this winter break. This is not your relationship with your adult child forever. This is a hopefully a very short term difficulty that they will need our guidance to get through, and then coordinating that as best we can between households, and then managing the difficulty between each household will help them better. But remember, sometimes we get really stuck on this has to be this way right now. Know that you're playing the long game. Really good to be with you. I know Carolyn has been compiling perhaps some thoughts or reflections or questions, so we'll ask her to share those with us. We're here for families. We're meeting. We are still at this moment meeting both face to face with clients who are not experiencing any symptoms or have not had any exposure, and meeting virtually with people. And if we can be a resource for you in that way with your family or with your adult son or daughter, or if we can be a resource to parents in helping manage this, we welcome the opportunity. So with that, Carolyn, do you have some reflections or reactions that people have compiled that we might be able to provide some thoughts or our own reflections about?
I don't actually. I haven't
Okay.
received any questions. So people, if you have any questions, go ahead and send them in.
Yeah, use the chat feature, and we can try and address those. Remember, we are recording this, so if you'd like a anonymous question, we can ask it and get it sort of addressed anonymously through Carolyn.
I'm not seeing any come in. So does anybody want to unmute and just ask it verbally? Okay. I have a question now.
Okay.
It says, any ideas how to encourage them to get help?
Co-parent or adult child? Probably adult child, I'm guessing.
Not sure.
Okay, Cal, you want to take that?
Yeah. Well, I think going back to Matt's thought about providing that feedback with a radical candor of kind of noting what you are experiencing, what you're seeing with their behaviors, their emotions, how they're showing up, and being able to give feedback with just genuine concern. I think one of the ways I see parents having difficulty is at times you can go into a message that sounds like you're the problem, and that typically doesn't work out for our kids, really anybody. And so being able to have a kind of this dialogue around, hey, I've been seeing this just lately. I've been noticing that you're really withdrawing from the family. I've noticed you just pull back and isolate a little bit more. And I just have some concerns just how you're doing. Can we have a conversation about how you're doing? And in that discussion, if your kind of parent flag is going off that they might need a higher level of care, to talk with them about, hey, I'm thinking that having a therapist, having some additional support might be helpful. Do you want to look into looking at different therapists in the area with me and include them in that search too?
So this mom elaborated a little bit, and her question was more about how to remove the stigma with an adult child.
Mm,
Yeah, normalizing, for if it's counseling, normalizing counseling, developmentally, you're at a place of great growth, young man, young woman. And, one of the things about that is it's, going through these growth spurts, in terms of our development and kind of movement towards adulthood can be really challenging. And this is an important time to surround yourself with some resources that can help you look at this. So that, normalizing it in that way, that this is a really challenging time, not just developmentally, but COVID on top of that. You might also encourage them to get to their primary care doc, which screens for a lot of medical issues, but mental health issues too. And the doc can also be an influence. He or she can kind of help give some of that messaging too. But really normalizing counseling as a way to keep growing and to help you navigate some of these life transitions. If you've had some counseling experience in the past yourself, not going into the specifics around that, but certainly sharing with them, this has been helpful to me in the past in helping me navigate difficulties at work or difficulties in my family of origin and or difficulties just in family dynamics and parenting. Sometimes I felt really inadequate to know how to parent you and your brother. And I found it really helpful to seek outside guidance. So really trying to normalize the experience of counseling and then potentially using the primary care doc as a way to help screen too and give feedback. They may have a different kind of influence than you do. So those are a couple other additional suggestions. Thank you for that question. This is really, really hard to watch your young adults struggle with this transition. When my daughter was 3, she would build these block towers, and they'd get about 3 high, and they'd fall over, and she'd cry. And it was excruciating to watch her cry. And I wanted so badly to jump in and build that block tower for her, because I'm really, really, really good at building block towers. But one of the things that happens when I do that is she doesn't learn to master the pain and discomfort that she's feeling, and she may learn that she may be rescued when she's experiencing discomfort. The other important thing is I don't learn to be okay with my discomfort of watching her in discomfort. And I got to tell you, as a parent, that is one of the most painful things to watch, is to watch your kids suffer and struggle and not be able to help. So part of this too is our growing capacity for managing our own discomfort around watching them struggle. Like Callie said, giving them observations. This is where I notice it looks like you're struggling. This is how I care about you. And then being able to normalize it, like I said, and let go of what you can't control. So
Okay, there are a couple more. There was one more comment from that same parent. It says paperwork foreign and barriers that I could help when he was under 18. The second question is, my son sought out an ADHD screening in Duluth where he is a student. I sense that he may be having feelings related to depression. Is it possible for me to contact the doctor who performed the screening and describe my concerns to him?
Well, Callie, why don't you take that one? I think you got it too. Yeah.
Well, I think one suggestion would be to talk with your kiddo about having a release of information. That as parents, you have an interesting perspective just of their whole life and how you're experiencing them too. And so you have great feedback that could be helpful for that provider. There are ways that you can craft a release in which it's just one direction so that parents could provide feedback to provider, but provider couldn't provide feedback to parents. So sometimes young adults like that kind of safeguard right there so that I as parent am going to give feedback to this provider, but the provider is not able to tell me anything that my child has disclosed or their thoughts and recommendations, but it's just a way to give that feedback to help that assessment process too.
Now
Matt, do you have-
that would be the ideal way to go. Talk with your adult child about that, so that there's transparency. The provider does not need to have a release in order to hear from you your reflections, observations. They will not be able to tell you that that your son or daughter is a client of theirs. That does not mean that you cannot provide them with feedback. Ideally, like Callie said, for transparency's sake, getting a release in place, even if it's one-sided, would be the best way to go. If you have great concerns about your son or daughter, and they are unwilling to authorize you to share those, authorize the provider to acknowledge that he or she is serving your son or daughter, then finding a way to get them that feedback so they can incorporate that into their assessment in some way may be useful. So you kind of got to discern that on your own. To what degree do I have concerns that there's not some level of transparency here for junior with this provider, so that they're not getting the help they need. You kind of got to discern that on your own. But ideally, like Callie said, talk with your adult child about. I'd like to be able to provide feedback. I don't need to know the ins and outs. Can we sign a one directional release so they can get feedback from me about what I'm seeing? Great question.
Another thing, this is Carolyn again, that I would add is I get calls from parents who don't know what to do because they have discussed their concerns with their adult child, but their adult child refuses to come in for help.
Yeah.
And the parent themselves are just struggling. You can come in yourself and talk to one of our counselors and get some support for yourself, or even get some more guidance on how to talk to your child about your concerns.
Yeah.
Or if you're struggling with your co-parent over issues, you can come in and get some coaching.
That's a really important point that Carolyn makes. If you stay in a helpless place, you will start behaving in a helpless way, in a hopeless way. And so if you find that you have no influence or don't know how to use your influence, and your son or daughter, they may not be ready to receive it, find some guidance yourself. That's a really important point. You don't have to stay stuck, even if someone around you chooses to stay stuck or can't see their way out in that moment. So Carolyn, thank you. Really good point there. Really lovely to be with you guys. Thank you for taking time over your lunch period. We know that these are really hard times for families, and the complexity of having adult children who are trying to transition into adulthood with COVID in the background, not even in the background, in the foreground right now, makes this very difficult. We're happy to be in it with parents and with families to help support in navigating this. And we really thank Wayzata Community Ed for the invitation to participate. Deb, what would you like to close us out with something? Is there another workshop you want to highlight, or any other way that you want to close out the time here?
I just want to thank you both for the great information, and thank you to Traverse Counseling for partnering with us. This is a really valuable resource for our community. And if you know someone that was not able to attend in person, we will make the recording available. I think we'll probably have it set up by the end of the week, and you can find it on the Parenting with Vision website. So thank you both.
Awesome. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, everybody.